The medicine cost more than their home, $40,000 for a single month's supply. Two 15-year-old twins, Kofi and Arma, worked 18 hours a day under scorching sun, saving every coin, not for themselves. For a sick, forgotten grandmother they found alone in their village. They believed they were saving a stranger. They had no idea she was the mother their billionaire son had given up on finding. This is the story of Kofi and Arma, two siblings in a forgotten village where water is scarce and hope is a currency few can afford. Every day was a calculation of survival until they found her, an old woman, sick and abandoned, with no one left in the world. Or so they thought. They made a choice that would break them, all while a single truth remained hidden. The son who could end her suffering with a phone call had stopped looking years ago. Their world was dust and heat. Kofi woke before dawn to haul bricks at a construction site 10 miles away. His sister, Arma, spent her days washing mountains of laundry at the riverbank for families in a town she could never afford to live in. Their pay was counted in coins, their meals were often just shared bread, and their home was a single mud brick room their parents left behind. They were 15, but childhood was a luxury they had never known. Their village, Ojumasi, was a place on the margins. Electricity was a rumor. The nearest well was a 40-minute walk. Hope was something people spoke of in the past tense, but the twins had each other, and that was a kind of wealth. Kofi, with his quiet strength, bore the physical strain. Arma, with her fierce intelligence, managed every seedy, every grain of rice, every impossible decision. The discovery happened on a Thursday. Arma was returning from the river, her back aching, when she took a shortcut past the abandoned compound at the village edge. A sound, weak and rhythmic, like struggling breath, made her pause. Behind a collapsed fence, curled on a mat under leaking lean-to, was an old woman. Her skin was stretched tight over her bones, her eyes clouded with pain. She had no water, no food, no one. Arma didn't hesitate. She ran for Kofi. Together they carried the woman, who whispered her name was Nana Surwa, back to their room. She was feverish, coughing, a prisoner in her own failing body. The village elder shook his head. She is not from here. Her family left her long ago. Sickness has come. There is nothing to be done. But the twins saw something else. They saw their own grandmother, who had died because they couldn't afford a doctor. They saw a choice. They could walk away, as the world had walked away from them countless times, or they could stay. They chose to stay. The local health worker confirmed their fears. It was a severe lung infection, compounded by chronic kidney failure. The treatment was a specific, powerful antibiotic and a regimen of specialized pills to support her kidneys. He wrote 2 names on a scrap of paper. "You can get these in Kumasi," he said, "but they are not for people like us." The next day, Kofi took their entire savings, the money meant for fixing their roof before the rains, and made the grueling trip to the city. At the pharmacy, the clerk scanned the paper. The total was 120,000 cedis for 1 month. Kofi's entire world savings was 17,000. He stood there, the numbers swimming before his eyes, the clerk's impatient stare burning into him. It was more money than he had ever held, more than their home was worth. He returned empty-handed. That night, as Nana Surwa's breathing grew more ragged, the twins made a pact in the dark. They would get the medicine, no matter what. Their already brutal workload doubled. Kofi took night shifts guarding a warehouse, surviving on minutes of sleep. Arma started selling baked cassava at the roadside after her laundry work, standing for 16 hours straight. Every CD was marked for the medicine. They ate less. Their own clothes became more ragged. The village whispered. "Foolish children," they said, breaking their backs for a ghost. After 3 weeks of superhuman effort, they had saved half. They bought a single week's supply. The effect was miraculous. Nana Surwa's fever broke, her eyes cleared. She spoke their names with a gratitude that shattered them. For the first time, she told them fragments of her story. A son who went to the city to seek his fortune, promises to return that faded with the years, a loneliness so vast it became a second skin. The medicine ran out in 7 days. Her decline was swift and terrifying. The twins were back at zero, facing a mountain that had grown even taller. This was the trap of medical poverty. Treatment wasn't a one-time cost, it was a financial siege. To stop was to let her die. To continue was to destroy themselves. Kofi, pushed beyond exhaustion, collapsed at the construction site. The foreman threw him 50 cedis and told him not to come back. Arma was cheated by a laundry client who refused to pay. Despair, cold and heavy, settled in their room. They sat beside Nana Surwa, listening to each labored breath, knowing the clock was ticking down. It was Arma who voiced the unthinkable. There is another pharmacy, in the old market. They do not ask questions. She meant a place known for selling stolen, expired, or counterfeit goods. The risk was immense. The medicine could be fake, could kill Nana Surwa faster, but it was a fraction of the price. Kofi looked at his sister, then at the old woman who had begun to feel like family. This was the line, cross it, and they entered a different kind of darkness. But the alternative was to sit and watch her suffocate. As the moon rose, Kofi pocketed their last 1,000 cedis. The path to the old market was a descent into shadows, a world where desperation was the only currency. He had no plan, only a need that overshadowed fear. What he didn't know was that his decision tonight would trigger a chain of events far beyond the market's filthy stalls. Because in a skyscraper office 300 miles away, a man named Quabner Asant had just received an alert on his phone. A private investigator's report. A grainy, years-old photo of an elderly woman, and a single, underlined sentence, possible sighting in the eastern region, village of Ojumasi. The search, abandoned a lifetime ago, was suddenly alive, and it was converging on the very same desperate act unfolding in the darkness. The old market at night was a kingdom of whispers and shadows. Kofi moved through narrow alleys, the air thick with the smell of rotting food and cheap kerosene. Stalls sold everything from pilfered engine parts to bundles of herbs with impossible promises. He found the place at the very back, a wooden shack with a single bulb dangling. The man inside didn't look up. "What do you want?" Kofi slid the paper with the medicine names across the counter. The man glanced at it, then at Kofi's worn hands and desperate eyes. He smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "You are buying for someone very sick." It wasn't a question. He disappeared into the back and returned with 2 unmarked boxes. 5,000. It was a fraction of the real cost. A trap disguised as a miracle. Kofi's hand trembled as he handed over the money, their last 1,000 cedis plus everything Arma had secretly saved from her baking. The boxes felt light, wrong. There were no official seals, no manufacturer names, just faded print. "Take 2 each day," the man said, his tone final. The transaction was over. The walk home was a blur of fear and hope. He had crossed the line. The medicine in his pocket could be salvation, or it could be poison. He had no way to know. Back in Ojumasi, the situation had deteriorated. Nana Surwa was struggling to breathe. Arma had propped her up on their only thin mattress, wiping her brow with a damp cloth, singing an old lullaby her own mother used to sing. The old woman's eyes were wide with a fear that had nothing to do with the sickness. It was the fear of being a burden, of watching 2 children break themselves for her. When Kofi slipped through the door, the look on his face told Arma everything. He placed the boxes on the floor. They stared at them, this gamble in cardboard. "We have to try," Arma whispered, her voice breaking. They gave Nana Surwa the first dose with a cup of precious clean water. She swallowed, her gaze fixed on the twins. "My good children," she rasped. "Why?" They had no answer that made sense to anyone but them. 300 miles away, in an Accra office tower that pierced the clouds, Quabner Asant stared at the grainy photo on his tablet. His mother. It was over a decade old, but the eyes were the same. A report from the private investigator sat beside it. The sighting was credible. An elderly woman matching her description, sick, being cared for by teenagers in Ojumasi. For Quabner, this news was not a happy reunion. It was a detonation in a carefully constructed life. His rise from nothing to telecom billionaire was a legend he curated. The story of the humble village boy who made good. The chapter about the mother he'd lost touch with, whom he'd assumed had passed away years ago in some distant village, was neatly closed, or so he thought. His assistant, a sharp young man named David, watched him cautiously. "Sir, we should verify. It could be a lookalike. There are many scams that target men in your position." Quabner didn't hear him. He was remembering the last fight. His ambition, her fear of the city, harsh words about abandoning his roots, the promise to send for her that got buried under a mountain of deals, mergers, and the relentless pursuit of more. Guilt, old and heavy, settled in his chest, but with it came a cold, practical dread. If this was real, it was a public relations minefield. The press would feast on it. The poor, forgotten mother, the billionaire son. "Send a team," Quabner said finally, his voice tight. "Quietly, get confirmation. If it is her, bring her to the capital, to a private hospital. Handle everything discreetly." David nodded, already calculating the logistics. The order was clear: contain the situation, manage the narrative, minimize exposure. Compassion was part of the budget. In Ojumasi, the counterfeit medicine created a fragile, terrifying illusion of progress. For 2 days, Nana Soa's breathing eased slightly. The twins allowed themselves a sliver of hope. Maybe the gamble had worked. They poured their renewed energy into earning more for the next month's supply from the same dark source. But on the 3rd day, Nana Soa woke up violently ill. Cramps, confusion, a yellow tinge to her eyes. The fake pills weren't just ineffective, they were attacking her weakened liver. The twins were now actively poisoning the person they were trying to save. Panic, pure and paralyzing, set in. They had no money for a doctor, no way to reverse this. They were trapped in the consequences of their own desperate love. Amma held Nana Soa's hand, sobbing apologies. Kofi stood outside their home, fists clenched, screaming his frustration into the silent, uncaring night. The private investigators team, 2 men in a nondescript sedan, arrived in Ojumasi the next morning. They asked questions at the village kiosk, showing the old photo. The shopkeeper, eyeing their city clothes and clean car, pointed down the path toward the twins' home. "The old woman is there, with the boy and girl. They are killing themselves for her." The investigators' report pinged on Quabner's phone minutes later. Subject confirmed. Location acquired. Condition appears critical. 2 juvenile caregivers present. Advise immediate extraction. Critical, the word cut through Quabner's professional detachment. His mother was not just alive, she was dying in a mud brick room, and someone else was there, trying to save her. The narrative in his mind fractured. This was no longer a PR problem, it was a personal cataclysm. He made a second call, bypassing David. This was to his personal pilot. "Prepare the helicopter, we are going to the eastern region, now." Back in the village, the twins faced their endgame. Nana Soa was fading in and out of consciousness. They needed real medicine from a real hospital immediately. It was an impossible sum. Kofi, wild-eyed, declared he would go to the city and beg at the big hospitals, tell them everything. It was as he was leaving that he saw the strange car parked near the elder's house, and the 2 men walking purposefully toward his home. They moved with an authority that had nothing to do with the village. Every instinct told him they were danger. Were they police? Had the fake medicine dealer reported them? He ran, not away, but back, pushing past the men to block his doorway. "What do you want?" he demanded, his body a shield. The lead investigator, a calm man named Ben, held up a hand. "We are not here to cause trouble. We are looking for Nana Soa Asant." Hearing her full name, a name they never knew, was like a physical blow. Amma appeared behind Kofi, her face pale. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ben ignored the question, his eyes peering past them into the dark room, seeing the frail figure on the mat. His professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing a flicker of pity. "We are here to take her. Her family has sent for her." The world stopped. Family, the word hung in the dusty air. Nana Soa had family, the son who forgot her. Amma and Kofi looked at each other, a universe of understanding passing between them. This was the rescue they had prayed for, but it felt like a theft. Before they could respond, a new sound filled the air, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that grew rapidly louder. The entire village emerged from their homes, looking up. A sleek, private helicopter, an alien bird of gleaming metal, descended into the clearing at the edge of the village, churning up a storm of dust and debris. The door slid open, and Quabner Asant, in tailored trousers and a crisp shirt, stepped out into the world he had left behind. He blinked against the dust, his gaze sweeping over the poverty, before locking onto the small crowd outside the twins' home. He saw the investigators. He saw 2 desperate, dusty children guarding a doorway, and in the shadows behind them, he saw a glimpse of white hair, a familiar curve of a face he had not seen in 20 years. His composure, the armor of his billions, cracked completely. All the calculated plans, the discreet extraction, evaporated. He started walking, then running toward the hut. The villagers parted before him, silent in shock. He reached the doorway, where Kofi still stood, defiant and trembling. Quabner didn't see a stranger. He saw an obstacle between him and his guilt. "Move," he said, the command of a man used to being obeyed. Kofi didn't budge. He looked the billionaire in the eye, all his exhaustion, his love, his sacrifice burning in his gaze. "You are too late," Kofi said, his voice low and raw. "Where were you when she was hungry? Where were you when she could not breathe?" The question hung in the air, a judgment. Quabner froze, the truth of it hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He was not the rescuer here. He was the reason rescue was needed. Behind him, the helicopter blades slowed. The silence they left behind was deafening. In that silence from inside the dark room, Nana Soa's weak voice called out a name, not Quabner's, but Arma, the name of the girl who had stayed. Quabner Asant, one of the richest men in the country, stood at the threshold of a mud hut, utterly disarmed. The reunion was nothing like he imagined, and the real story, the story of what these children had done, was just beginning to unravel before him. He was about to discover that the debt he owed could not be settled with a helicopter or a hospital bill. It was far greater than that. For a long moment, Quabner Asant could not move. His mother's voice, calling for a stranger, was a key turning a lock he had sealed shut decades ago. He looked from the defiant boy to the frail shadow in the room, and the narrative of his own life, the self-made billionaire, shattered. He was just a son who had failed. "Step aside," he said again, but the command was gone, replaced by a plea. Kofi held his ground, but Arma, practical even in the storm, touched her brother's arm. "Let him pass, Kofi. She needs a hospital now." The fight drained from Kofi's shoulders. He moved, and Quabner entered the room he had left behind in every way that mattered. The smell of sickness and poverty hit him. In the dim light, he saw his mother, so thin, her skin papery, her eyes clouded with pain and the toxins from the fake medicine. He knelt, his expensive trousers in the dirt. "Ma," he whispered, the childhood word feeling foreign on his tongue. Nana Soa's eyes focused slowly. Recognition, then a flood of emotions too complex to name: relief, sorrow, anger, love. She reached a trembling hand, not to touch him, but to point weakly toward Arma and Kofi. "These are my children now, you hear." The transfer of loyalty was absolute and devastating. Quabner nodded, a lump in his throat. He turned to the investigator, Ben, his voice cracking with an urgency that had nothing to do with public relations. "Get the medical team from the helicopter in here now. We are airlifting her to Accra Private, immediately." What followed was a blur of controlled chaos. Two medics in crisp uniforms pushed past the twins with a collapsible stretcher. They assessed Nana Soa with a terrifying efficiency, starting an IV, hooking up a portable oxygen tank. The villagers watched, a silent audience to a rescue that felt like an invasion. As they carefully lifted her onto the stretcher, Nana Soa's hand shot out, gripping Arma's wrist with surprising strength. "They come with me," she insisted, her voice a ragged whisper that brooked no argument. Quabner looked at the twins, exhausted, suspicious, clinging to each other. They were a complication, a living reminder of his neglect, but they were also his mother's lifeline. "They can come in the helicopter," he said. The flight to Accra was a journey between worlds. Kofi and Arma, pressed into plush leather seats, stared out the window as their village shrank to a brown speck, then vanished. They had never been higher than a tree. The silence inside the cabin was thick with unspoken history and medical monitors beeping. Quabner sat across from them, staring at his mother, unable to meet the twins' eyes. At Accra Private Hospital, a world of gleaming floors and silent efficiency, Nana Soa was swept into a suite of rooms that looked more like a luxury hotel. Specialists descended. The counterfeit drugs were identified, and a treatment plan to flush the toxins and treat the underlying infections began. Money was no object. The best of everything was summoned. Quabner installed the twins in a private family lounge with food and clean clothes. It was a gilded cage. They were treated with a polite, distant courtesy by the staff, charity cases of the Billionaire. But they were not allowed to stay in Nana Surwa's room for long. Family only, a nurse said gently, ushering them out. The irony was a knife twist. Back in his corporate office, Quaebner's PR team was in full crisis mode. The story had broken. A villager had filmed the helicopter's dramatic arrival on a cheap phone. The video, grainy but explosive, was now trending. Billionaire's long-lost mother found in poverty-stricken village. The narrative wrote itself. The forgotten parent, the lavish rescue. But then, a second, more damning story emerged from an anonymous tip, likely a disgruntled villager or the investigator's driver. This one had photos of Kofi and Arma. The headline, "The twins who did a billionaire's job." Public sympathy swung violently away from Quaebner and toward the twins. Commentators asked the question Kofi had voiced. Where were you? Quaebner's carefully crafted image was crumbling in real time. He summoned the twins to his office on the hospital's top floor. They stood before his desk, small and out of place. He slid 2 envelopes toward them. Each contained a bank check for 100,000 cedis. For your troubles, he said, his tone formal, a business transaction. For saving my mother's life. You can go home now, we will take care of her. Arma looked at the checks, then at Kofi. This was more money than they had ever dreamed of. It was security, a new roof, an escape, but it was also a dismissal, a payment to disappear. Kofi picked up the envelope, felt the weight of the paper. Then slowly, he placed it back on the desk. We did not do it for money, he said, his voice quiet but clear. We did it for her. We stay until she asks us to leave. Quaebner was stunned. He had offered a fortune, the solution he understood, and it had been refused. He was facing a currency he didn't deal in, unconditional loyalty. It was at that moment his assistant, David, rushed in, his face ashen. Sir, we have a problem. The doctors just ran the full panel. There's more. The news was catastrophic. The kidney damage from the infection and the counterfeit drugs was severe and irreversible. Nana Surwa would need dialysis immediately, 3 times a week, for the rest of her life. Or a kidney transplant. The wait list for a donor kidney in the public system was over 7 years. She didn't have 7 months. Quaebner, desperate, said, put her on the private list, buy the best place. Money is no object. David shook his head. It's not just money, sir. The list is short because donors are scarce. Even privately, the wait is long. And at her age, with her condition, time is the one thing we can't buy. The room spun. Quaebner had all the resources in the world, and they were useless. He was going to lose his mother after just finding her, not to poverty, but to the cold, impersonal mathematics of medical scarcity. Then Arma, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. What does she need? A kidney. David nodded, impatient. A matching donor, a family member is the best chance. Quaebner didn't hesitate. Test me, I'll give her mine. The tests were run with urgent speed. The result came back the next day. Quaebner was not a match. His blood type, his tissue, all incompatible. He was useless to her in this most fundamental way. He stood in the hallway outside the lab, his head against the cool wall, defeated. It was the hospital administrator, reviewing the file, who noticed something. The 2 teenagers who brought her in, he said, they are not her biological grandchildren. No, Quaebner said, exhausted. They are not family. Pity, the administrator mused. Sometimes matches come from the most unexpected places. The human body doesn't care about bloodlines, it cares about biology. A wild, impossible thought entered Quaebner's mind. It was reckless, unethical, desperate. He pushed it away, but it returned, persistent. He looked down the hall to the family lounge, where Kofi and Arma were keeping their silent vigil. They had given everything else. He could not ask for this. He would asterisk not. But that night, Nana Surwa took a turn for the worse. The dialysis was struggling to keep up. Her body was failing. The doctor was blunt. Without a transplant soon, we are just managing the inevitable. Quaebner found himself walking to the twins' lounge. They were asleep, Arma's head on Kofi's shoulder, exhausted by a vigil they refused to end. He watched them, these 2 strangers who loved his mother more than he had. The unthinkable question now had a voice. It was a line that, if crossed, would change everything forever. He had the power to ask, to offer them the world in return. But he also knew, after everything, that some debts are so profound they can never be called in. They can only be honored. He made a decision, not as a billionaire, but as a son in debt. He turned and walked not to the twins, but to the hospital's chapel. It was time to stop trying to control the story and start being part of it. The real crisis was no longer medical or financial. It was moral, and the only currency that mattered now was the one he had spent a lifetime ignoring: sacrifice. Quabner Asant did not sleep that night. He sat in the sterile quiet of the hospital chapel, not praying but finally listening, to the memory of his mother's laughter in their old village kitchen, to the silence he had left in its place, to the quiet, unwavering loyalty of two children who asked for nothing. The equation of his life, success measured in assets and acquisitions, no longer balanced. There was a debt on the ledger no amount of money could clear. At dawn, he went to the twins' lounge. They were awake, sharing a simple breakfast of bread and tea. They looked up, wary, expecting another transaction, another envelope. Quabner sat opposite them. He didn't offer money. Instead, he told them the full, unvarnished truth. He explained the severity of Nana Surwa's kidney failure. He told them he was not a match. He explained the agonizing wait for a donor, a wait she would not survive. He laid out the medical reality with a stark honesty he usually reserved for boardrooms. Then he did what was, for him, the hardest thing. He asked, not demanded. The doctors say a living donor is her only real chance. They can test anyone, even unrelated people. I will not ask this of you. I have no right. But if you were willing to be tested just to see, I would owe you a debt beyond any money. He braced for their anger, for the rightful accusation that he was now asking for a piece of their bodies after failing to give his own time. But Kofi and Arma just looked at each other. They had a silent conversation that lasted a full minute. Finally, Arma spoke. We will take the test, not for you, for her. The compatibility tests were a battery of blood draws and scans. The doctors explained the risks, the lifelong implications of being a living donor. The twins listened intently, their faces solemn. They were not making a grand gesture. They were making a calculated, loving decision, just as they had when they spent their roof money on medicine. While they waited for results, Quabner acted. He didn't issue a press release. He gave one raw, unscripted interview to a respected journalist. He spoke of his failure, his long neglect, and the two teenagers from Odumasi who had done what he had not. He didn't paint himself as a hero. He painted himself as a man who had been saved by the compassion of strangers. He announced the creation of the Surwa Foundation, a non-profit not just for his mother's medical bills, but aimed at tackling the very crisis that had almost killed her: catastrophic medicine costs and lack of dialysis access in rural regions. Its first project would be a diagnostic clinic in Odumasi. The public narrative shifted. The story was no longer about a billionaire's rescue, but about redemption and the power of community. The twins became reluctant symbols, their faces everywhere. Then the test results came. Arma was not a match. Kofi was. It was a 1 in 1,000 chance, but there it was. The boy who had carried bricks to buy medicine was a near-perfect biological match for the woman he had carried home. The doctor called it extraordinary. Quabner, hearing the news, felt the world tilt. The person who could save his mother was the boy he had tried to pay off. He went to Kofi, prepared for him to back out, to name his price, to finally wield the power he now held. Kofi was sitting alone on the hospital roof garden, looking out over the city. He didn't turn as Quabner approached. I will do it, Kofi said quietly before Quabner could speak. But not for your foundation, not for a clinic. I do it for one reason, because she calls me her son. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. In the days before, Kofi was calm. Arma was terrified, clinging to her brother, questioning the risk. But Kofi was steadfast. We did not bring her this far to lose her now, he said. The morning of the transplant, Nana Surwa was lucid. She held Kofi's hand, her eyes filled with a pain deeper than sickness. My child, you have given too much already. Your strength, your youth, I cannot take this. Kofi smiled, a real, easy smile they had rarely seen. You are not taking it, Nana, I am giving it, and a part of me will always be with you, keeping you strong. It was the most he had ever said at once. The surgeries were simultaneous. In one operating theater, surgeons carefully removed one of Kofi's healthy kidneys. In another, they prepared Nana Surwa to receive it. The procedures, funded by limitless resources but powered by a bond that had nothing to do with money, were flawless. Quaibner and Armour waited together, a silent vigil of shared anxiety. For the first time, there was no hierarchy between them, just two people afraid of losing someone they loved. The news came hours later. Both patients were stable. The kidney, once placed, began functioning almost immediately in its new home. Recovery was a long road. Kofi, young and resilient, healed quickly. Nana Surwa's body, weakened by years of struggle, took longer to accept the gift. But accept it did. The yellow tinge left her eyes. Her strength slowly returned. The medicine she now needed was to prevent rejection, and it was readily available without cost. Quaibner kept his word, but in a way that honored the twins' dignity. The Surwa Foundation was launched, with Armour and Kofi offered not as poster children, but as junior board members with real input. The clinic in Odumasi was built, but it was named the Armour and Kofi Community Health Center. Their old mud brick home was rebuilt into a proper house, but it was deeded to them without strings. The most significant change, however, was not in foundations or buildings. It was in a hospital room and later in a spacious house in a quiet Accra neighborhood. Nana Surwa recovered, not just in body but in spirit. She had her son back, a man humbled and changed, and she had the two children of her heart. Quaibner did not try to become their father. He became, instead, a guardian, a sponsor, and slowly, a friend. He ensured they received the education they had dreamed of, tutoring them himself on weekends in math and business. Kofi, it turned out, had a sharp mind for engineering. Armour dreamed of becoming a doctor. They did not move into Quaibner's mansion. They lived with Nana Surwa in a home he bought nearby, a family forged not by blood, but by choice and sacrifice. The twins called her Nana, and they called Quaibner Uncle Quaibner. It was a title he earned not through wealth, but through his daily, quiet effort to be worthy of them. The story made headlines for a while, then faded, as stories do, but the lives it changed continued. Kofi's kidney thrived in Nana Surwa's body, giving her not just years, but a vibrant second life. She lived to see Armour graduate top of her class and be accepted into medical school. She lived to see Kofi win a scholarship to study civil engineering, with a focus on rural water systems. On the day of Armour's white coat ceremony, Nana Surwa stood between her two sons, the one she bore and the one who had given her a part of himself. She held their hands, her grip strong. The photograph that appeared in the paper the next day showed not a billionaire and his mother, but a family, a complete, if unconventional, circle. The final, surprising detail emerged years later, during a routine family medical history. A genetic test, out of curiosity, revealed a distant, almost forgotten link. Decades back, Nana Surwa's own grandmother and the twins' great-grandfather had been siblings. The connection was frail, generations old, and scientifically insignificant for the transplant match. The miracle had been biological chance, not hidden lineage. But for Quaibner, it was a profound closure. The twins were not random strangers. They were, in the most fragile, beautiful way, family that had been lost to time and poverty, finding their way back to each other through sheer, unwavering kindness. They were living proof that what we often call chance is sometimes just love, working in ways we cannot immediately see. The debt was never repaid, because it was not that kind of debt. It was woven into the fabric of their new lives, a silent understanding that the greatest fortunes are not made in boardrooms, but in the dusty compounds of forgotten villages, in the choice to stay, and in the courage to give a part of yourself so someone else can live. So what does this story leave us with? It's easy to see it as a fairy tale, a miraculous twist of fate where everyone finds a happy ending, but that misses the point entirely. This is not a story about miracles. It's a story about choices. Kofi and Armour's choice to stop, Quaibner's choice to finally listen, Nana Surwa's choice to accept love from strangers. We live in a world that often teaches us to look away, to believe our individual actions are too small, that the problems are too big, that someone else, someone richer, more powerful, more connected, will handle it. This story stands as a powerful rebuttal to that. The most profound rescue in this entire saga wasn't performed by a helicopter or a billionaire's wealth. It was performed by two hungry children who chose, against every rational instinct, to care. Their action created a chain reaction. It exposed a broken system where medicine is a luxury and care is a commodity. It forced a powerful man to confront his own humanity. It reminded us that our greatest poverty is not always material. It can be a poverty of attention, of connection, of simple courage. The systemic problems that almost killed Nana Surwa are still very real. Catastrophic medical costs still push millions into poverty. The elderly are still abandoned. The gap between the powerful and the powerless remains a chasm. But within that harsh reality, this story plants a seed of a different question. What if the solution doesn't always start with systems and policies? What if it starts with us, with the decision to see the person everyone else is walking past? Kofi and Arma didn't set out to change the world. They set out to save one woman, and in doing so, they changed everything for her, for Kwebna, and for themselves. They proved that the most valuable currency in any crisis is not money, it's presence. It's the refusal to let someone suffer alone. So I'll leave you with this. Look around your own world right now. Who is the invisible person in your orbit? Who is struggling silently, believing no one sees them? You may not have a fortune to give. You may not have all the answers, but you have a choice. You can walk on or you can stop. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of the power we each hold in our hands and our hearts, then don't let that feeling fade. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that challenge us to look deeper and choose kindness. Because the next life that changes forever might just be waiting for someone like you to make the choice to see them. Thank you for watching.